Servicing disc brake of a front wheel of the motorbike. Hello and welcome to this session on servicing the disc brake of a front wheel of a motorbike. The disc brake of a front wheel is very effective in bringing the vehicle to a halt. We have already seen how the disc brake of a front wheel works in the previous session. However, brakes must be clean, in good condition and properly adjusted before every ride. Over time and after running for long miles on the road, disc brakes lose some of their effectiveness. This leads to longer response times, less efficient braking, and less bike control. Basic brake system maintenance involve making sure that the brake components are properly positioned and in good working order. In this session, we will learn how to service the disc brake of a front wheel of a motorbike. The procedures for servicing the disc brake include checking the hydraulic system for leaks, cleaning and inspecting all brake components, and replacing the brake pads as required. Before we go into the procedure, first let's take a look at the tools and materials. The tools and materials required are cloth for wiping, cloth for covering, pliers, vice grip pliers, screwdrivers, large flat blade Phillips, spanners and sockets in various sizes, hammer, steel rule, grease, lubricating oil, sandpaper, 220 grit, brake fluid, dot 3 or 4, brake parts if needed, split pins. Now we will see the steps involved in servicing the disc brake. For this, clean the disc, caliper, hydraulic reservoir and fluid cap with a dry cloth. Firmly apply the brake and check for fluid leakage from the brake system. If there is any leakage of fluid from any part of the system, replace the damaged parts. Check for deterioration and damage of the hoses, pipes and joints. Check for looseness of joints and clamps. Also, make sure that hoses and pipes do not come into contact with mechanical parts. When the vehicle is running, mechanical parts are constantly in motion and thus pipes and joints might get damaged. Check the brake pads for wear before filling the brake fluid. A low fluid level may be due to wear of the brake pads. If the pads are worn, the caliper piston is pushed out. This accounts for a low reservoir level. Check the leading edge of the pads where the disc enters the caliper. If the brake pads are not worn and the fluid level is low, check for leakage. If the pads are worn, then replace the pads. Replace pads as a set. If worn to the brake pad, wear limit line or wear limit groove. As said earlier, a quick visual inspection can be made at the leading edge of the pads where the disc enters the caliper. However, if this proves difficult, a check can be made at the indicator on the caliper marked by a small triangle. Note: also inspect the rotor by pinching it between your thumb and forefinger and rubbing it crosswise on the rotor. If any grooves are felt, inform the customer that the rotor needs turning or replacement. To replace the brake pads, loosen the caliper mounting bolts with a socket and slide the caliper away from the disc. Using a flat screwdriver, pry the pads apart to make room for the new ones. This compresses the hydraulic pistons and returns fluid from the calipers back into the master cylinder. Loosen the retaining springs of the pad and slide the pads away from the caliper using needle nose pliers. If there is a retaining pin for the brake pads, you must use a nail or a pin on the small hole and tap it with a hammer. That will allow the larger end to come out freely. This releases the brake pads. Slide the new pads in and clip the holding spring back into place. When installing the new pads, insert the pin in the same direction that you took it off and use adjustable pliers to press the pin back in if required. Slide the caliper containing the new pads over the disc and into place. Line up the caliper holes with the mounting holes to the suspension and tighten the bolts to the specific torque. Before removing the reservoir cover, turn the handlebar until the reservoir is level. Unscrew the reservoir cover. Fill the reservoir if needed. Remove and clean the fluid cap if required. If there is a strainer, clean the strainer if needed with compressed air. In this case, there is no strainer. Place a rag over painted, plastic or rubber parts whenever the system is serviced. A word of caution. Brake fluid will damage painted, plastic or rubber parts. Tip: topping off brake fluid, if pads require replacement later, will cause a fluid overflow from the reservoir when the caliper is pried apart. Take a test drive and check for brake effectiveness. Take suitable corrective action if needed. Clean the work area, wipe off the motorcycle, and clean and put away the tools. With that, we have come to the end of this session. In this session, we have learned to identify and clean the parts of a disc brake, identify defects in brake pads, calipers, and hydraulic lines and discs. Hope you have enjoyed this session. Thank you.